Guys, welcome to my shop today. We were supposed to have a men's breakfast this morning. With this virus, we can't get out and have breakfast, so I hope you've had gravy and biscuits and bacon and eggs like D. Cody and his crew would have cooked up. When breakfast was finished, Patrick Resch, our new chair of the men's leadership team, would have gotten up and handed out a menu, and we'd look through all kinds of things. I would have been trying to get you to sign up to help me set up Fun Day Sunday because it was supposed to be tomorrow. But here we are at home, and we had a program planned for the breakfast on the 18th that we had to cancel. So I was kind of a backup, and here I am. We're going to cut some dovetails today. I want you to see my shop. This is it. A friend of mine here at the church and a member of our church, Kevin Sandage, built this for me in 2006. He built it right onto our house, so it looks like it was always here. And it's two-story. Down in the basement of the shop, I keep all my lumber stored and also my dust collection equipment. But upstairs on the main floor is where all the woodworking takes place. So come on in with me and let's cut some dovetails. So before we start cutting dovetails, I thought it'd be good if we just did a quick tour of the shop. So let's go down to this end, and we're just going to kind of walk around 360 degrees and let you see my setup. I'm really blessed to have this shop. This is lumber storage. I use this for kind of special wood or something that I've cut off apart and want to use it later. This is my hollow chisel mortiser. We'll talk just a little bit more about that in a minute. And then let's just move around the wall here. This is a radial arm saw. This is an old saw. And it's really handy for cutting off long pieces, doing your rough cutting. Little storage here for cut-offs. All the cabinets here in the shop, I have built those, and I have lots of good storage. This next saw it's a chop saw. It's a compound miter saw, and this is where I do a lot of my kind of final cutting to length. I have a dust collection system. You see hoses connected to everything, which is really good for keeping your lungs clean. This little box here is our grandsons love coming in the shop and playing with me, and so these are, they call it bits of wood that they put together and have a lot of fun with. This is my jointer. A jointer is just used to get a board flat, perfectly flat, and one edge square to that. Then this is a sanding station, comes in really handy. I have my clamps on a vertical rack that I made so I can roll it around to wherever I'm doing a glue up. Behind those clamps is my lathe. You can see the lathe tools there on the wall behind. And then next to all of that is my router table and router. This is also connected with dust collection, and so this works actually pretty clean. One of the things I try to do in my shop is to keep the tools and accessories that you use with a piece of stationary equipment close to that piece so you're not running back and forth. And at the end of this outfeed table, I built this cabinet, and you can see these are all the things that you need for the router table. So here's for example, here's a drawer, a box of router bits, and those are called finger joints or box joints. They're a little bit like dovetails, but they're awesome when you're making a box like that, and I've used those quite a bit. Next to the router table is my scroll saw. This is new, and I'm still just getting used to it, but you use it for really intricate cuts. I have this pattern. That's a foot for the little spice chest you'll see over here, and once you get your pattern, then you cut your thicker wood. So that's going to be really handy when I learn how to use it well. This is my band saw. It gets a lot of use. This is called a planer. And once you get the wood flat on one side and an edge square, then you run it through the planer, and that gets it to the right thickness. That's a 13-inch one and a really, really handy tool. Some tools hanging on the wall here. This is a storage cabinet that I made a long time ago, but it lets me store, you can see some of my hand planes in here, my inlay tools, and other things that you want to keep from getting dusty. There's my routers. And then this little bench is really good for sawing because I've got it up on risers, and it gets it right up to the right height. It's good for chiseling. You see all my chisels in the back. And then I made these this cabinet on the wall to put tools in that I don't want to get dusty. My carving tools, some of my smaller planes and saws, spoke shaves and things like that. So again, really handy as a place to keep hand tools. Here is, this cabinet has my hand planes, and I use the glass just so I can grab them and know exactly what I'm getting. This is my main workbench, and it's down low, unlike this one over here, because this one is for hand planing and doing things where you don't want it up real high. I've kind of laid out a few of the tools I'm going to use to cut dovetails. This is a special vise that I like to use when I'm sawing dovetails. This bench was one of the first pieces of furniture or a woodworking project that I did years and years ago. And over the years, or in fact very recently, I added drawers to it to make it more useful. But I got a lot of practice with dovetails on that. And this rack behind me includes tools that when I'm working at the bench, I want to be able to reach and grab them. It's very convenient. Having things close is important. This is my drill press, and in keeping with having things close by, this little cherry cabinet has all my drilling accessories, drill bits and things like that in it. This small table here is an assembly table. You can see I've got drawers in it with nail guns and things. At the bottom are all my screws. It's got door hinges and things. We're going to come back around to this guy in a minute. But this last corner is this is where I store all my finishing supplies. I made this cabinet, of course, to be up high so I can get things out of it real easily. Mix up my finishes here. And also I do sharpening here. These drawers on this have jigs and fixtures and things that I use in my sharpening. My water stones are here that I use to hone. There's a water or wet grinder here that I use to do the rough sharpening. And then I have little drawers in this cabinet that I made for all of the accessories that go with that. So it's all contained and real close by. I didn't mention the table saw, but that's kind of in the center of the shop. And this is where I rip lumber to the right width, sometimes cut it to length. And again, all my equipment for the table saw is in a cabinet right here at the table. So I had a lot of fun building the cabinets for the shop. And it was good practice on doing things. When you're building something for the shop, you can always say, well, that's a shop project. You don't have to be quite as precise. But you learn a lot building things for the shop. Now, I want to get into talking some more about things that lead us to dovetailing. As you noticed my tools and my shop, some of you are probably wondering, I wonder if I could go over and borrow some of David's tools. You know, those are kind of neat, and maybe I could learn how to cut dovetails. I'm going to tell you, I am really selfish about my tools. There's a guy named Gary Rogowski who heads up a woodworking school out in Oregon. And Gary has said this, I wrote it down. Gary says, if you want to touch or borrow my tools, here's what I say to you. When I die someday, far in the future, you may touch my tools. If you wish to die today, then you may touch them now. And then he goes on to say, I have found this surprisingly effective a defense against most tool borrowers, and it works at my bench rather well. Good luck to you in protecting your tools from the borrower. I am unabashedly selfish about my tools, and I always tell people if they say, can I borrow that chisel? I'd say, you know, I'd rather loan you my toothbrush than to loan you my chisel or my hand planes. If you want to come to the shop and get a tour, I'd love to have you come, but please don't ask me to borrow my tools or use them. I'm really picky about that. Okay, let's get into some woodworking now. When you do woodworking, you can do lots of different things. I like to make furniture, and I make things as small as a jewelry box up to like a corner cupboard I made for Becky a few years ago. And in woodworking, where you're making furniture, there's some different parts. One part is getting your lumber milled. So I get it at a sawmill, bring it home, it's rough. And so I run it through some of these pieces of equipment that you saw, the joiner to get it flat, the planer to get it to the right thickness, table saw to rip it to the right width, maybe the table saw to cut it to the right length. But you do that and you get your parts so they're ready. Oftentimes I run over those parts with a hand plane to get them nice and smooth. Now you've got a bunch of parts and you need to join them together. And I want to just real quickly, there are different kinds of joints. The most common joint probably in woodworking is joining boards edge to edge. If you take those two boards and you put glue on each of these edges and you push them together, you rub it, you push them together, you put clamps on it, you let it sit for about an hour, that joint will be stronger than the wood itself. And you see a lot of furniture that may have a side that's 20 inches wide and it's made up of 3 boards. It's hard today to get boards 20 inches wide. And so woodworkers, furniture makers do that all the time. Randy's going to turn with me and I'm going to show you a lectern. The Wolf Tabor School asked us if we could get them give them a lectern. This is an old one we had at church, and I mean, it was falling apart. The top was totally destroyed. We were going to throw it away, and so I took the old top off, and I made a new one. And this is out of red oak. And if you look over here, it just looks like one board. And over here, if you look more closely, you can see there's a joint right here, and there's a joint here. So I had a board that wide, and that wide, glued them together, clamped it, and that's really, really strong. Put another coat of finish on it so it all matched up. And whenever Wolf Tabor is back in school, I'll have them a lectern. Now, that's one type of joint. Another one is whenever, and this is really common in woodworking, you need to join the end of a board to the edge of another one. You have that kind of joint in face frames and doors. Here's a good example of that. You see how that piece of wood is joined to that one? And the way we do that is with a mortise and tenon joint. Pull that apart and you've got a tongue cut on this one, and you've got a rectangular hole cut in this one. That's the mortise, this is the tenon. And when you put glue on each of those and push it together, this is the finished joint. And the joint almost disappears. But what's really important is you could break the wood, but you won't pull that out. And so for that configuration, that's an ideal joint. There are lots of ways to join things in that configuration. The mortise and tenon is the more traditional one. It goes back a long way. Well, the other way of boards come together is like this, where you've got the end of a board and it's facing on not the edge, but the face of the other board, like this. There are different ways of doing that. If it's a rough piece, you could nail it. If it's you might put glue on it and put screws in it, but that's not a really strong joint, and glue on the end of a board doesn't work well anyhow. So one of the best ways to join boards in that configuration is with dovetails. Dovetails have been around since, oh my goodness, they found them in the ancient pyramids and in boxes that pharaohs were buried in. And this is, of course, you know what a dovetail looks like. This is the end that shows you the ends of the pins and the tails here. If you turn it, you get this. This is called a through dovetail. This has little narrow pins. And there's 4 of them. On the same, by the way, I haven't glued any of these together. That comes apart like this. You get a lot of mechanical strength in one direction. You can't pull it apart that way. You can pull it apart this way. And so that's why when you glue it, it makes an exceptionally strong joint. Same type of wood, same configuration, but this time I only use 3 pins. And a lot of what we do in dovetailing is kind of an aesthetic. If it's going to be visible, you want it to look good, but you want it also to be really, really strong. If you're making a drawer, it looks like this. There's the face of the drawer. And you don't want to see the end of the tails, and so you make it like this. It's called a half-blind dovetail. It's blind on the front, and it's visible on the side. When you looked at the little spice chest, you saw half-blind dovetails. This takes a little more time to make. It's a very, and see how snug that is? I have to, oftentimes I'll use a hammer to tap it together. You can't do it if it's too tight, but if you can see that, I've sawed and then chiseled out the slots for those. And you have to be really careful to keep these all nice and clean. But that makes a really nice, strong joint, and it's quite attractive whenever it's viewed from the front. Now I'm going to tap that together, and there it is. I could put glue on that, and it'd be there for a long, long time. I made one more big one just for today. This is kind of like what you would see with maybe a dresser top and a dresser side. Heavy pieces. This is like 7/8. This is maybe 9/16. And I decided to use the little skinny pins on that. You see, these are sort of narrow and skinny. And I made a mistake. If you look really, really closely, you can see a crack. And I mentioned earlier, if the pieces are, if they're too tight and you hammer them together, that's what happens. So you want it to be, you don't want to just have it fall together. You want to have to put some pressure on. It's okay to have to tap it together, but you don't want to make it crack. I kept that one because I wanted you to see what can happen. If I were making a piece of furniture and that happened, I'd get another board and I'd mark it and recut that one. So now we're going to leave those apart, and you've seen enough about what dovetails look like. Let's make some now. So I've got two boards. This is poplar wood. It's a common secondary wood. I like using poplar for drawer sides and backs. And I'm going to do through dovetails like this. By the way, these dovetails, again, it's through dovetails. On this one, it's exactly the same as these other two, except I decided to put a little finish on it. So you can see when you finish dovetails, that end grain just pops out. And that's part of the attraction. That's the ends of the tails. That's the ends of the pins. Again, this isn't glued together yet, but it fits together with a really, really strong, that one fits right, and it makes mechanically a good joint. And when you glue it, it's a really, really good joint. So now, I'm going to show you what we do whenever we make dovetails. Here we go. The first thing that we do is we have to mark the thickness of the board. So I go to my tail board. I just happen to decide I'll use that for the pins. The pins are these things that, the pins are what you see the end right there. So the pin board is this board here. That's a pin board. Those are the pins that are sticking out. And so I'm going to, you use your cutting gauge to mark the thickness, and then you come along the face of the board with the pins, and you mark that. And I don't know, Randy, if you can see, but it actually makes a cut. This has a little blade, and it has a cut. I've incised the fiber, and that's going to be really important because later I'm going to be using a chisel, and on my last cut, I'll put the chisel right in that cut. So on the pin board, I'm going to mark it on the front and on the back. And then it just happens my pin board and tail board are the same thickness. And so I'm going to mark them without having to reset my cutting gauge or marking gauge. There are all kinds of different marking gauges like this. This is my favorite. It does a really nice job. It gives me a line that I can cut to. Now, my eyesight is not as good as it used to be, and I do something now, oftentimes, that helps me to see that line. I simply take a pencil. This is just a mechanical lead pencil, and I put it right in the mark, and I do that. The pencil lid will follow right along that cut that you've made in the wood, and that makes it easier to see. I'm going to just barely mark these edges. Now, that's my tail board, and I like to cut pins first. It's so funny in woodworking magazines, you'll see all kinds of arguments about which is better to do, tails first or pins first. It doesn't matter. Either way, But the guy who taught me how to make them is a guy named Lonnie Bird. He's an incredible furniture maker in Dandridge, Tennessee. He's written a lot of books. And he runs this school, and Lonnie says, pins first. So that's how I learned. And sometimes you have to do it the other way around, but usually this is the way I do it. I want you to see that's just it's a little square that I used to mark the dovetails. This is a 1 in 4 slope. Some of these dovetails, like this one, is like a 1 in 8 slope. It's skinnier. But this one, the way I typically use them is this one. And so I simply do this, make a mark. I come over, make another mark, come over, make another mark, and then one here. Now, back to the other side, and I need to get some vertical lines down because I'm going to be sawing my lines. And this little square is cool that once you get it on your slanted line, you can mark your vertical line, and I'll show you those just in a second very accurately. So I come to here, mark across, and I mark down. I come over here, mark down, and it's all marked out. Now, let me show you what that looks like. You see, when I saw, I've got to saw at an angle, and I'll follow real close to that line, and I'll come down vertically. The vertical cut is the most critical. It really doesn't matter if I don't follow the exact angle because I'm going to use this piece to mark the other one. But the line has to be vertical. Otherwise, the joint won't go together as well. Now, this is a dovetail saw. And it's a really small saw. You can get all kinds of different dovetail saws. This one is really thin, and it cuts on the push stroke. You can get a Japanese saw that cuts on the pull stroke. And I have one of those. That's the one I actually learned to cut on. I kind of prefer this one, but if you're looking to get into dovetailing, let me know and I can recommend some saws for you. Now here I go. Whenever you saw with dovetails, just a couple of things to remember. Let the saw do the work. Don't push down. Saw sharp. It's going to go right through the wood. And just stand in a natural way so that your arm can pivot back and forth. You're not reaching. But here we go. Now I want to get close to the line and I want to leave the line. And so I start just making some little nibble cuts. And there we are. And I should have come right to the line. Now, once you start cutting, this seems kind of picky, but it's good to keep the same angle. You see, I'm going straight down, but I'm at an angle. And then later, I'm going to turn and cut back the other way. So I'll repeat. I'm back to another pin. And by the way, something I should have done, it's a good idea to always do this, is mark your waist. Whenever you're cutting something out, that's waist. I'm going to take it out. That's waist. And I mark it on this side so I can see it really well. It's so disappointing whenever you cut on the wrong side of the line. Okay, so I know where my waist is. I'm going to keep this line. You notice how I keep shifting my light? I want to saw right up to my line, but leave the line, okay? So here we go. You notice it's an easy cut. Let the saw do the work. And I came right down to the line. Now I'm going to get this one. Again, I'm going to saw right to the line and leave the line. Saw to the line. Leave the line. Oops. There we go. Now, I'm going to come back the other way, okay? And I've got a couple more cuts to make. You see, I'm sawing it with this angle, but my saw is still vertical or plumb. Okay. Another one. And we're done with this kind of saw cut. Now, I've got to get this wood, and that wood out. And one way to do it is just go to the other bench and chop it out with a chisel. But I like to do something that's just a little bit faster. This is a coping saw. It's kind of a fancy one. There are all kinds of coping saws. When you tighten that up, it really needs to be tight. Listen at that. That's a really tight, it's a tiny little blade, but what that lets me do, it lets me go right down into the kerf that I just made, and I turn it, and here I come. Now I'm going to saw out that waste, and I'm just going to leave a little bit of wood. Actually, I'm leaving more than I like to, but once I've got that, see, I just keep coming right across. I'm going to get down to the bottom. Now I think I'm going to go over to the other bench. We'll get the rest of that in a minute, but I'm going to go over to the bench and show you how to chisel to that line. I want to show you what I've done. I could have chiseled out, I could have sawed it closer to the baseline, this line. I've left myself some work to do there, but that's okay. I always want to leave some to chisel out. So let's go to the bench and we'll do some chiseling. Cutting dovetails is basically requires two skills, actually three. The first is layout. And you saw me take a lot of time getting my layout done just right with baselines and drawing it in. But then the other parts are sawing to a line and chiseling to a line. And what I'm about to do now is to chisel to a line. These are Lee Nielsen chisels, and they are extremely sharp. You have to have all your tools really, really sharp, and especially when you're doing something like dovetailing. Now, I've got two things in mind that I need to do here. I want to chisel down until I get back to the baseline, but I don't start in the baseline. If I do, the wood that's here is going to push my chisel back. So what I do is I start out here, and I'll show you now this, you're going to hear some pecking. You see how that chisel just cuts it right away. Again, this chisel is really sharp. And because this pin is angled on the bottom, you'll see me kind of slope my chisel. So now I go into the other side, and I'm going to go over to the other part. And now I've got almost to the baseline, not quite, so I'm going to take off a little more. See how well it's going through. I'm not going all the way through. I'm going about halfway through. And then I'm going to flip my board over. And I'm going to do the same kind of cut, except this time the pin is sloping back that way, so I'm going to angle a little bit that way as I go in. And there you go. And then I'll do another cut. And I'm getting really close to my baseline, which is what I want to do. Now, if I hadn't used the little coping saw to make this this cut, I'd just be spending more time chiseling. So again, some people do it different ways. There's not just one way to do anything. Okay, I'm going to flip it back now, and this time I'm going to go right to the baseline. And if you listen, you could even hear the chisel pop into the baseline. Hear that? That chisel goes right into the baseline, and when you cut, you are cutting it off right on the baseline. And I actually overcut just a little to make sure that I'm not leaving any high points in the middle of the board. Show what we're doing here. You see, I've cut right to the baseline now. That's right on that line that I made earlier. So now I flip it back over, and now I'm on the inside of the joint, and I'm making the final cuts on this side. I'll get right in the baseline now. Okay, and we'll make a cut here and then go right into the baseline. And right into the baseline. Okay, now I've got 2 of the pins cut, and what I'm doing here is just cleaning it up. You have to be really careful. Don't ever cut with a hand up or close. When you're doing this pairing, it's important to keep your other hand, I'm left-handed, you'd probably be doing it the other way, but I'm keeping it down below. So what I've done is I've basically cut 2 of the pins, and all I'm doing now is just kind of cleaning that up at the base. And then I would take the little fret saw or coping saw, and I'd cut this one out, and that would expose, this is a half pin, a full pin, a full pin, and a half. And so I would expose that, but you don't want to see all that. I'm going to lay that aside, and we're going to go and finish that up. All right, I spared you all the pain of having to watch me chop out all of those, but now this is done. I've got all of those out, and so I'm just simply going to take it and lay it right on this is my tail board with the baseline on there that you saw before. And if this was a big piece of wood, I'd put a clamp on it and hold it. But as long as I hold it right on the baseline and I keep it side to side okay, I can simply take my pencil, reach in there, mark it, and I've got those marked. And so now if you see that, you can see my pencil lines, and all I need to do is extend those across the top. Okay? So I put it back in the vise, and I take the same square that I used before, and now I've got the angle of those pins. When I said before the angle of the pin wasn't all that important, it's because whatever the angle is, I've used it now to mark my tails. And so all I'm doing is making a vertical line or a line straight across the thickness of the tail board coming off the corner of these tails, and I'll show you in a minute what I mean by that. And one more, these are half pins or half tails on the end. And there we've got it. Now remember before I put an X on my waist, this time the waist is the little parts because I'm cutting out the sockets for the pins. And I do that on the face as well as on the edge. And let me show you what I've got now. Okay, so this is what I'm about to saw. I'm going to saw across this and down that slope. This is just the opposite of cutting pins, where before I kept my saw perfectly plumb. Now I've got to turn my saw to an angle this way and that way, and where I turned and sawed this way, now I got to come perpendicular. So it messes with your mind until you kind of figure out how these things fit together. But if you go back and look at the finished one, you see what I'm about to do now is this cut in this wood where I'm going to cut out these little trapezoids, okay? And I'm going to saw down here, 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 and then we'll chop it out. Okay. Let's remember, I like to start on one side and kind of go to the other. Randy doesn't like me having my lights on here, but I got to see, Randy. Here I go. Now I've got to, it's really important on this that I saw to the line, but I don't saw away the line. If I saw away the line, it's going to be a sloppy fit. If I don't get right up to the line, it'll be too tight, and it may crack like that one did that I showed you. Now here we go again. Same angle, different joint, right up to the line. Letting the saw do the work. Got it. Now I'm only going to do a couple of these, so I'm going to switch angles and come back on the same one. Now sawing right to the line, but leaving it. I'm blowing sawdust away when I do that. Got to be able to see my line. See how easy the cut is? And now, just to make this go faster, I'm going to saw right down the middle of the waist. So when I chisel it, that'll pop out a little easier. I'd be sawing the other side, but I'll do that off camera. But I flipped him over, and I'm going to saw out that half pin. And I put the saw as close to the line as I can get it, and saw it out. Now it's starting to take shape. Look at that. See, there's the socket for that half pin. I left just a tiny bit of wood. That was intentional because I want to be able to take a chisel and I want to pare it off. Now this is a different chisel. This is a paring chisel. It's cut on a more slanted angle, a smaller angle. And I simply put it in that baseline that I made, that mark that I made with my marking gauge. And I pare down. And I cut the end grain of that wood. Now I'm going to come back on the other side, make a similar cut, and now get the part out of the middle. And that's done. So now that should, I've gone right down to the baseline. The wood is cut out. Now Randy, if you'll follow me around, we're going to go cut out that little socket right there. And then we'll, off camera, we'll cut the rest and see if this thing will fit together. Now for this, I need a little narrower chisel because I'm going to start out on the end of this thing. You see, I'm going to chop and come all the way back to my baseline, but I don't start there. By the way, this is the outside of the joint. I can tell that because of my marks where I cut it. I need to keep up with that. So here I go. My chopping is going across the grain. I'm taking small cuts on this piece from one side, and you can see it starting to break out. I flip it over to the other side. I like to go halfway through and then turn it over. And this is a 1/4 inch chisel. So I'm not, you got to be really careful not to get up into the tail there and mar that. You want this to look good when you're finished. Now, I'm almost back to the baseline. You can see there, and this is all breaking up. And because I sawed that little bit of that line right down the middle of it, it makes it easier to break it up, and maybe that'll come out. It did. So now I'm gonna go into the baseline, and to do that, I'm going to use a little wider chisel, so the chisel is the width of the bottom of the socket. So here I go. I'm right in the baseline, and I've gone about halfway through. Get back to my little narrower chisel. Now this is on the show side, so I want to be really careful here. You want to be careful all the time, especially on your show side. By show side, I just mean this is the side of the joint that people are going to see. So we're down to that last chop on the show side, and I put my chisel right in the baseline, and you give that a nice little tap, and I'm through. I've got that cut, and now all I need to do is knock out that little bit of waste, and we've got a good socket. Okay, we're going to break now. I'm going to cut out the rest of these. You don't need to watch that, and when we come back, we'll have the rest of the tails cut, and we'll be able to put this thing together. Take the tail board, and I like to set it right down on the ends of the pins. And when you do that and tap on it just lightly, it's good to feel it start going in. That says that, okay, everything's going to fit up okay, and you just tap it back and forth. I've got another hand underneath, and I can feel it still moving, still moving. If it stops moving, it may be that you just need to tap it a little more, but you have to be real careful. If it's frozen up and something needs to be trimmed, and you hit it too hard, you'll split it, just like I did on the earlier one. That's fit up really nicely, and everything's tight. I would take that apart, put glue on the faces of each part of the joint, and then I would put it back together, and you usually don't even need clamps. The glue will hold. There's enough mechanical interlocking the joint to hold it. Now I take a little hand plane and I just cut off the ends of the pins. I've intentionally made the ends of the pins a little proud. They stand up just a little bit high. And that way, whenever you plane it, they come down exactly flush to the board. And if you can see that, this one is darker than that, and it's because I've just planed off the end grain. And that's a neat thing because it makes it more attractive. You can see the contrast between the wood even better. So I won't take the time to plane that off. Again, it's like this joint here. And when you put finish on that end grain, it really, really pops. Folks, that's dovetailing. If you want to learn how to do dovetails, first I would recommend Lonnie Bird's class. The guy I took, I've taken 5 classes from Lonnie. He's incredible. But if you just want to practice this at home, mark a board and mark it with lines that look like pins, mark it with lines that look like tails, and then get yourself a saw and a chisel and go cut away. It's a lot of fun. It's almost like therapy for me. I want to end this now by telling you about something that happened to me several years ago. This is my dad's hand plane. It's a Stanley Bedrock. It's an awesome plane, one of the best that they ever made. Dad was a carpenter, and he loved doing finish carpentry work. That's when he would use something like this hand plane. He never did woodworking, furniture making, that sort of thing. But I saw him using hand tools, and I think that's part of what makes me love doing woodworking so much today. Well, anyhow, when Dad passed away in 1980, I got most of his woodworking tools. And I needed a new hand plane, and I thought, why don't I just get Dad's and clean it up? He'd used it kind of rough, and it was dull, needed to be sharpened. So I got out his plane one day, and when I took it apart so I could clean it up and sharpen it. This is the blade with a cap iron on the top of it. And to sharpen it, you simply take this apart. And when I took this cap iron off, I discovered something that just sent a chill up my back. There, on this cap iron, is Dad's thumbprint. And at some point, when he was using it, that's been 50 years ago, his thumb must have been sweaty. You can see he was a big guy. He had big hands. And he pushed down on that, and it kind of oxidized. I don't know if you can see it. It may look like a smudge to you on camera, but I can actually still see ridges and swirls in it. It's like that handprint was permanently oxidized into this metal. And when I saw that, I said, you know, I don't think I need to clean this up at all. Don't need to use it. I'm going to put this back together, and I'm going to keep this exactly like it is. That thumbprint, that impression is there forever. But you know, as I think about it, we are always making impressions and imprints in this life. Every day, whether we realize it or not, we're making an imprint. We're making an impression on people. Dad made so many more important impressions and imprints on me than just this. Dad loved to read the Bible, to study the Bible, and I picked up on that, and I love to do the same. There were lots of principles and values. For one thing, always say the truth, mean what you say what you mean. That was pure Dad. He always said, be fair with your dealings. Always honor the Sabbath. So many things that he passed along as imprints or impressions on me. Every day we make impressions and imprints on people. And if they're good ones, they can be our witness. Guys, I bless you. I thank you for listening in on this, for being part of this. Hope you've enjoyed it. And I hope soon this virus is finished and we can actually see each other and have that next breakfast. Our next one is scheduled for August, and we're hoping to have Dr. Tom Osborne as our breakfast speaker. You might be interested in seeing some of the pieces of furniture that I've made. If not, just hit fast forward on your viewer. But some of the things that I've made include, last year I made a slant front desk. and the drawer front, some of those are carved. So that was probably the most challenging piece that I've made. You saw the little spice chest. Just before that, I made Becky a blanket chest out of some walnut that was cut from her dad's farm many, many years ago. That was a very special project. I made a credenza for my study here at home. I made a gun cabinet for myself. And those use different kinds of wood, and maybe you'd be interested in seeing those and the pretty wood that's in those.